Beard was a man of the left, but not of the Marxist left. And the economists and historians who most fully shaped his economic interpretation of history were Brooks Adams, John Atkinson Hobson, Edwin E.R.A. Seligman, and Thurston Veblen. I'd like to speak briefly about each one of them and say a little bit about what the contribution of each was to Beard's way of thinking about the economic interpretation of history. He had an enormous admiration for Brooks Adams, who was the grandson of John Quincy Adams, our sixth president, a brilliant historian. And his classic book is The Law of Civilization and Decay. It came out in 1895. It made a permanent impression on Beard. The basic idea of the law of civilization and decay is that the historical process is shaped mainly by the struggle for empire. That every period of history is really determined, the character of every period in history is determined by the clash of empires. One empire in the position of dominance and then rival empires coming up in opposition to it. That idea became a centerpiece of Beard's thinking, and he concluded from that point made by Adams that in order to understand politics, economics, and society, it's necessary to take into account the clash of empires first. That's the first point for an historian to understand about any age he or she might be trying to write about. The importance of John Atkinson Hobson, a man Beard knew. He met him in England. Beard spent 4 years as a graduate student at Oxford and got to meet many important English writers. John Atkinson Hobson was one of the most important. He was the author of Imperialism, a Study, came out in 1902. And in that book, which is the most brilliant book, I think, ever written on the subject of imperialism, and Beard agreed with that, Atkinson argued that the taproot of imperialism in the modern world is corporate capitalism. And we need to understand that in order to realize what is going on in the world at all times, that there are different levels of reality, different levels of causation in politics and foreign policy. But at the base of all of that activity is the constant expansion, the constant yearning of corporate capitalist economic forces to absorb as many resources and territories and markets as possible, touching off many wars as that process goes along. So Imperialism, a Study, 1902, was a vital book for Beard in understanding the economic interpretation of history. A professor he had at Columbia University, Edwin E.R.A. Seligman, was also very important. He wrote a very important book also in 1902 called The Economic Interpretation of History. It's a crucial book because much of it is a critique of Marx, arguing that because of Marx's philosophical exoticisms and his melodramatic political agenda, Marxism was devoid of scientific rigor, and that to achieve a scientifically rigorous interpretation of history, which Seligman was proposing to do in the economic interpretation of history, one had to understand the material forces at work without assuming, as Marx did, that there would be a happy outcome in history. Marx thought that the dialectical materialism would propel humanity inevitably toward a communist outcome. Seligman disagreed with that, and Beard disagreed with him as well. The rich have always ruled. They rule now. It stands to reason they always will. There's always going to be a struggle against the people in power. So Seligman's vital for showing Beard how unreliable Marxism was as a historical interpretation. It's a crucial part of Beard's intellectual itinerary. The final person is Thurston Veblen. In my view, one of the few authentic geniuses America has produced. His books are brilliant. The Theory of the Leisure Class, which appeared in 1899, Absentee Ownership, which appeared in 1923, are two books that made a profound impression on Beard, particularly for his later work. And what Veblen tried to communicate in his work was a general theory of oligarchy. He really proposed a way of thinking about history that Beard absorbed completely, working that legacy in with other streams of thinking from Brooks Adams and from John Atkinson Hobson, from numerous other sources as well. But from these two crucial books, The Theory of the Leisure Class and Absentee Ownership, Beard arrived at an understanding of how there's always a power elite in American history. This has been true from the beginning of our history. The power elite always gets the domestic policies and the foreign policies and the wars it wants. That's the basic argument of Veblen, especially in his last great book, which is Absentee Ownership. So those four thinkers, I would say, beginning with Brooks Adams, moving on to John Atkinson Hobson, Edwin E.R.A. Seligman, and Thurston Veblen, really form the core of Beard's economic interpretation of history. They give him his intellectual marching orders as a historian. And this economic interpretation of history is the essence of it.